So Judith has been using a story from Racing to English to prepare an online lesson for her students, and she's just reached the first exercise, which is at the bottom of this page. This exercise first asks the students to read the words, and then either to translate them into another language or to write some sentences using each of the words.
Now we know if we can activate the pupils' first languages, then we can accelerate their learning, both their learning of English and their learning of the curriculum areas. So that's what we're aiming at here in these exercises. So the first exercise just asks, can you read it? And ideally you'd want the students to read those to the teacher to make sure that they can access the keywords that are in the story. Then we ask them to translate them into another language. The first time I wrote this exercise, I said, can you translate this into your first language? But I'm trying to make it more inclusive. So of course, if you happen to speak Gujarati as well as English, you'll translate it into that language, maybe your first language. But others of us are learning French or Spanish, or we've got experience of Russian or Chinese languages. So I wanted to make it include everybody, and to make it even more inclusive for those of us who are monolingual, I've got the one about, what does it say? Write some sentences using those words. What we're doing is checking understanding. Talking about activating the pupils' first languages, we don't have to speak them. It's so easy to say, can you translate these words into your first language or into another language? And the children will work hard at it, and that will get them thinking. We may not have access to all the learning that's going on, but we're giving space for that learning to happen. Now, I've focused on the key words of the story, but it'd be very easy to expand that activity and say, translate the whole story into your first language, either in writing, if you're literate in your first language, or record it onto a tape recorder. Don't have tape recorders nowadays, do we? Record it onto the computer. And then, of course, you could go on. Can you write some questions or dictate some questions about the story in your first language? So we can get all sorts of first language work going on without sharing their language at all, but engaging them and activating that first language to help the students learn English.
So what did Judith do with that exercise?
Task 3. Translate the words below into your home language. Use the link below to Google Translate.
Judith then goes on to read the words to her students before expecting them to translate them. But I was excited by the use of Google Translate. I thought, I collected this story from our law in the 1980s, and we didn't have the internet in the 1980s, let alone Google Translate. So wonderful things can help the students now. But then I came across one of the words they were expected to translate, and it was the word smelt. Now, funny things happen to words when you're in your 70s, and the word smelt suddenly said to me, little fish. And then it said something about smelting iron or iron ore. And it took a long time before I realised it meant the past tense of the verb to smell. And that raises a number of issues. If Google Translate is going to help you, we need to choose words which don't confuse Google Translate. And we're no good if a child types in smelt, S-M-E-L-T, and out comes small fish. We want the past tense of smell. So I wish I had used the word smelled rather than smelt. And then so I actually looked up smelt in the Wikipedia and things, and up came the small fish. And then I read about the past tense, and it said in British English, both smelled and smelt are acceptable past tenses. But in other forms of English, particularly American English, only smelled is acceptable. And I suddenly realised, since the 1980s, I don't ever think I've seen smelt written. I think in British English now, we tend to spell it smelled. And of course, American English and British English are only two of the many Englishes across the world, because English is becoming very much the lingua franca for the whole world. And smelled is much easier for everyone to understand than smelt. So I've actually changed it on my copy of the story. So when I update Racing to English, that'll be the new one. But it made me alert to problems we can have when we're asking children to translate, and we need to think about ambiguity. Are any of these words going to cause Google Translate some problems? Because that actually may well cause the pupils some problems. So, children's first language, a powerful learning tool, but we do need to think about it just a little bit.